video games, a form of ergodic literature that has transcended into one of the most brilliant forms of storytelling in the modern age. They are more immersive than books, and longer and more involved than movies and TV. Video games have quickly rose to become one of the biggest entertainment platforms in the world, reaching a revenue record of $184 billion in 2023. While this is all well and good, what did I mean when I mentioned ergodic literature? Well, in simple terms, it's when the reader is required to put in an amount of effort into the text to transverse past it. This term has thus allowed video game designers and writers to transcend what we might consider to be a typical story that has existed in novels and TV. Games such as Hades show us how to combine a traditional narrative and video game elements, using its roguelike nature to aid in the narrative of Zagreus' endless pursuit of freedom. But story is also derived from the player's experience, an effect which has been researched by academics like Jacob Majewski in his 2003 minor thesis known as Theorizing Video Game Narrative. In the thesis, he discusses different types of video game storytelling, and he describes one of his models, known as the building block model, and here is how he describes the model. When the game designers, rather than implementing a narrative for the player to experience, implement a system of parts that come together to form a story in the hands of the player. To highlight this model of storytelling unique to the ergodic video game genre, I will talk about one game which released recently. It was a smash hit on launch and continues to provide the story of its players even to this day, and this game is Helldivers 2. If you've managed to escape this game on TikTok and YouTube, I would be surprised. Right after the game's release, it surged in population and only continued to grow. To put it quickly, Helldivers 2 is a game where the player base fights an ever-ongoing war where we take planets and push the enemies of the galaxy out. This does not tell a story in a traditional academic sense, but instead uses systems to create a story defined by its player base. For example, we can take a look at the story of Malevolent Creek. Malevolent Creek was simply a world held by the robot faction at the start of the game's release. After players trained themselves by fighting on the so-called bug front, they would move over to fight the bots. They would land at Malevolent Creek and would be slaughtered by their new unexpected foe. The planet became dubbed by the fanbase as Space Vietnam, and so a dogged campaign to liberate the planet would begin. Malevolent Creek was simply one planet among hundreds, but due to the ergodic nature of video games and the highly addictive gameplay loop of Helldivers 2, it soon became part of player stories. As Creekers, they would fight to liberate the creek no matter the cost. The liberation would sway and the war would wage on. We lost access to the creek due to a push from our great enemy. The player base mourned. We argued when the so-called Creekers continued to fight and had us fail the major order. And when we finally took the creek, the player base rejoiced at the victory. And to reward us for our efforts in liberating the planet, every player got access to a new cape that mourned the countless losses that had occurred, and one day we may come to fight there again. Malevolent Creek was a planet always bathed in night. Thus, the automatons with their red laser-firing rifles stood out and caused many a cinematic moment. The trees were also said to speak binary, as many players were ambushed by patrols moving their way through the dense brush. This all fed into the narrative of the planet, a place where soldiers went to die and died in their literal thousands. This was just one planet. Other planets have their own stories, such as Cyberstan, the thought homeworld of the automaton faction, or Hellmire, a living, literal, flaming hell for the Terminid players. Almost every planet in Helldivers has its own story to tell, even the ones that we have yet to see. The ergodic nature allows the stories of these planets to feel personal to every player, as seen by the fervour of the so-called Creekers. Malevelon Creek is just one example of storytelling in Helldivers 2. To tell the story of the galaxy, Arrowhead Studios implemented a few different kinds of narrative structures. The first of these major narratives have to do with the environmental storytelling. We are told nothing about the factions of this galaxy, but it is all there, hidden throughout the worlds we explore and fight upon. With game stories being ergodic in nature, it also allows for these details to be hidden in plain sight, and it is up to the players to engage with these clues and piece together what they mean. The designers have also incorporated what can only be described as a dungeon master, who controls the larger narrative of the galaxy at play. This GM, known simply as Joel, can control the factions and how they move. He can issue what is known as a major order, which moves the player base in certain directions, yet this wider narrative is still controlled by the players. If we are told to take a planet and succeed, then a scenario will play out and we may push further into enemy territory. But if we fail, then a new enemy may be introduced, or we may lose access to brand new equipment. Another primary concept that allows this game's ongoing narrative to be so special is the live service element. A live service game, for those not in the know, is a game which is terminally online and promises to be an always evolving world, though few live service games have ever achieved such a feat. The live service aspect of Helldivers allows the game to tell a story that is happening in real time. Something new is primed almost every day, and it gives the impression that this ergodic narrative is being defined by the players and their actions, and that their actions have a direct influence as to things that will happen in real time. As I've mentioned before, there is a faction named the Automatons. At the beginning of the game, they made a grand push towards something. The players at the time theorized on where they could potentially be headed. It could have been Cyberstan, it could have been Super Earth. The players banded together and decided to push back, and by push back, I mean they annihilated the entire faction. They took 5 planets in 5 days and wiped the faction off the map entirely. Bot players were lost, not knowing where to go to satisfy their cravings for automaton oil. Then, all of a sudden, there was a push from the top right corner of the map. A massive automaton invasion fleet invaded and took in a massive amount of space within just a few hours. This all happened with the design, due to the design of Joel and his team, and is ergodic storytelling at its an evolving narrative at its absolute best. The galactic war moves forever on in conflict. This perspective only focuses on the story of one of the factions. I haven't the time to talk about the Terminids and their story, or the conspiracy theories about blue lasers and flying bugs. We'll leave those for another time. Helldivers 2 narrative is not just interesting to engage with, it is something totally new to the gaming and storytelling space. An ergodic narrative which requires total engagement with its player base, and one so well designed that it brings the raw emotions of its player base to the forefront. This is the power that ergodic video game narratives can have over their players.